Tonight, celebrity chef and Labour supporter Tom Kerridge tells me tax rises in the budget for business will lead to a huge amount of closures. Before the election, the restaurateur was among those who signed a letter declaring Labour the party of change. Now he's worried that firms are being suffocated and strangled.
I do feel that the answer at the minute is not by punishing or making life harder for small businesses, because I think that knock-on effect is many people closing, people beginning to think this isn't worth it, isn't worth the debt.
Also tonight, after Downing Street describes comments by Greg Wallace as completely inappropriate and misogynistic, the MasterChef presenter apologises. Also this evening, the UK calls on all actors involved in Syria, including Iran and Russia, to follow international law as the conflict enters a new phase. And if you weren't feeling Christmassy yet, well, you basically have to now if you're in Westminster, with trees in both Downing Street and Parliament being lit up tonight. All that and more with our festive bauble of tonight, Thangam, Debbonaire and Andrew Mitchell, who'll be with us for the next hour. It's Monday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. About 6 months ago, in the run-up to the election, 120 business leaders wrote a letter endorsing Keir Starmer's Labour Party. Now, they urge people to give Labour a chance, saying that they're a party that wants to work with business to achieve the UK's full economic potential, with a long-term growth strategy, working in partnership with the private sector. Now, the letter was seen as the culmination of Labour's successful wooing of business, all those love-bombing breakfasts with the Chancellor paying off. But since the election, things have been, well, bumpy at best. The budget hike in employers' national insurance contributions has been seen as a tax on jobs, with the CBI's latest growth indicator today showing growth expectations among UK companies has seen a decisive turn for the worst. And today, I've interviewed Tom Kerridge, the chef and restaurateur. Now, he signed that letter backing Labour, and he says he still supports them. But he's worried, he's really worried about the impact of the budget. Now, he told me it will have, in his words, a catastrophic effect on hospitality in the new year, and that we'll see a huge amount of closures. The industry, in his words, is being suffocated and strangled. And remember, this is a friend of the Labour Party, someone who wants them to do well. But today, he's urging them to think again. We'll hear that interview in a moment, but first, let's just talk to our chief political correspondent, John Craig. The murmuring's growing about Labour and business.
Yes, you mentioned that CBI survey, which has got quite a lot of coverage today. It's the hospitality industry in many ways, isn't it? You mentioned Tom Kerridge there, who's very much leading the fight against many of these tax rises. There's a vote in the Commons tomorrow on the national insurance rise. And then, of course, there's the farming community. Now, we can argue about whether they're all millionaire toffs who are buying up these farms, or they're struggling family farms. Of course, there are some of both. But, I mean, that has become a real issue as well. I mean, I've said to you before here, Sophie, I think the majority of the present government's problems are all down to Rachel Reeves. The statements at the end of July, taking away the winter fuel allowance, massively unpopular. And then, of course, the farmers, and particularly the hospitality industry. And really, we've seen polls over the last few days with the Prime Minister's popularity, the Chancellor's popularity plunging. It is the economy, really, that's... I think a lot of people will forgive this government over the prison overcrowding. They can quite legitimately blame the Tories for that. But on the economy, it's Rachel Reeves' measures.
And there's a big speech, isn't there, planned later this week from Keir Starmer, and what we're expecting him to be talking about?
Well, this is where he's talking about his missions again. I mean, I thought he dumped those when he said the two key things are the economy, cost of living, and the borders. But he seems to have gone. He's going back to those. Big speech on Thursday. Well, some people might call it Mission Impossible, but he's going to be really trying to convince people that he's on the right track and that things are getting better. Because at the moment, of course, a lot of voters, as the polls suggest, think they're worse off over all these cost of living measures, and fuel prices, energy prices are going up and so on. We heard here on Sky News yesterday, Pat McFadden, no, it's not a reset. Well, if it's not a reset, is it a relaunch? No. It's really setting out the agenda for the year ahead. I mean, normally Prime Ministers make these sort of speeches in the new year, but he's getting in early. Can I just mention tonight's speech, or are you going to ask me about that?
Go on, then.
Tonight, he is at the Guildhall for that very fancy dinner where all Prime Ministers, with the exception of obviously the female ones, and Gordon Brown, who refused to change out of his business suit. It's the speech, foreign policy. So, in actual fact, the Prime Minister is going to be saying good foreign policy is good for the national interest. He's likely to cosy up to Donald Trump, of course, because he wants a trade deal with him. He'll probably say it's not a choice between Europe and the United States. We need to do business with both. The message, according to Number 10 in advance of the speech, Britain is back, standing tall on the world stage, a trusted ally. Obviously, he'll talk about trouble spots like Ukraine, the Middle East, and so on. This is a big occasion, obviously, in any Prime Minister's calendar. I mean, I am old enough to remember the famous Margaret Thatcher speech. Andrew Mitchell will remember it, where she talked about how the bowling's been pretty hostile of late. And, of course, a few weeks later, Geoffrey Howe talked about the captain sending in the team with a broken bat or something, and she was out within weeks. But I don't think we'll get any fireworks from Sir Keir tonight. He's not a fireworks sort of guy, is he? It'll be a serious speech on the world stage. And then later, as you say, this big domestic policy speech, trying to get the government back on course after all its recent setbacks.
John, thank you very much indeed. John Craig there, our chief political correspondent. Well, we were speaking there, of course, about my interview with the chef and restaurateur Tom Kerridge. He backed Labour before the election. Let's have a little listen to what he had to say to me earlier. Thank you so much for being on the programme. It's great to have you here. You obviously signed a letter supporting Labour ahead of the general election. How do you think they're getting on now?
I think there was a very, very short honeymoon period. It didn't last very, very long at all. I think there was a lot of communication issues, I think, right at the beginning. And I think then in terms of support for small businesses post-budget, I think there's a lot of, I wouldn't necessarily say backlash, but a lot of, business frustration, most definitely.
You mentioned there the post-budget frustration. It does feel like in the business community, particularly the small business community, there were certain measures in the budget that have hit quite hard. And I know you're obviously in the hospitality industry. Is it something that industry is feeling?
Yeah, the hospitality industry, it always feels massively under pressure anyway. It's one of those industries and one of those businesses that is run by people. There's a vocation and there's a passion. It's one that doesn't, many places don't often make profit. Most of them just about struggle to break even, but even in good times. But it's run by people who absolutely love what they do. It's a high-skilled industry, but it's not always the highest of wages. But it is one of those industries now that there's a huge amount of back-of-house pressures, so to say, that all of the costs have gone up behind the scenes. So there's no wiggle room, there's no maneuverability, there's nowhere to kind of reposition or change your business plan without passing on costs onto the guest. And I think is a very difficult thing for hospitality to do. It's already seen as an expensive treat eating out, whether it's a midweek pizza, whether it's the price of a coffee or even a pint of beer, let alone Michelin-starred restaurants. All of these things are seen as now quite luxurious and incredibly high costing. To then pass any more costs furthermore onto the consumer is something that hospitality needs to avoid. But the problem is that, it is beginning to be, I suppose, suffocated and strangled a little bit by those ongoing costs, with many closures already happening.
Yeah, like you say, it's one of those things, I guess, where it's quite easy to say, you know what, I can't quite afford this. I'm not going to take my kids out for a pizza this week, or I'm not going to buy a coffee. I'll make one at home. It makes a lot of sense what you're saying. I just wonder if there's any sort of specific measures that you feel have particularly hit the industry. I mean, I'm guessing the change to employers' national insurance must be quite a big one.
Yeah, that's a huge one for many employers. I think for us, we've worked today, calculated it's around about £850 per member of staff extra per year. So if you've got 200 members of staff, that's an awful lot of money. But even smaller businesses with a workforce of, I don't know, 5 or 10, that does make a big difference coming into their bottom line costs that really do, I suppose, have a reaction in a negative process into the business in terms of employment. It's already a short-staffed industry, but is it looking at re-employing? Will it start giving out those jobs? I mean, probably not. I think most hospitality spaces are now looking at, okay, what is the workforce that we have? How do we survive with it? How do we get through? This is a very difficult time for hospitality because the next few weeks are particularly busy, and they give a false sense of feeling that everything's okay because, you know, the next few weeks there's lots of people going out, there's lots of money being spent, and that money gets spent on hospitality and retail, and it does have an uplift of the run up over the next few weeks into Christmas, but it's the other side of into New Year when it completely drops off a cliff, and there wouldn't have been enough money made throughout the summer months to get to this point where then people would then be sat there with enough money to get through the leaner months. So I think it's going to have a catastrophic effect moving into the new year.
A catastrophic effect, you think, then? What does that look like? Does that look like people laying off staff, businesses even going bust? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think in all honesty, there will be a huge amount of closures. We've already got high-profile names and Michelin-starred restaurants that are deciding to shut their doors and places that are closing because it just cannot operate at a profit. And when that starts to happen, it does begin to filter down. And it's not just the smaller businesses that are saying it. I know the government have faced a letter coming in from some bigger name hospitality, I suppose, not people, but in terms of businesses, whether it's, you know, big name chains, or breweries that are really beginning to push the government, saying, listen, you know, we really need to think those national insurance contributions because, and again, it's not just hospitality, and I imagine it's a lot of industries that are facing those sort of things, whether it's construction, whether it's care, whether it's, you know, the NHS. I think anywhere with a big workforce is going to struggle to with those costs that have gone on. And I'm sat in two minds, in two camps, because, you know, I am a Labour Party supporter, and I do believe that they are the right people to try and get this country into the right position and where it should be in terms of broken infrastructure. However, you know, that infrastructure, it needs funding. It does need money to be able to get things right. I firmly believe that all industry is built on a workforce and a happy workforce, and people being able to get on with their lives and enjoy it. And whether that means being able to get to work, to think that their kids will be able to get, you know, an education system that works properly, and a care system and a health system that works well for them. You know, all of these things aren't there in a positive space at the minute. And, you know, the government is trying to right those wrongs and trying to make it right for the workforce. But as a small business owner, that does have a huge effect on. So trying to find that balance is a very difficult one. I am not the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and I haven't got the answer to it. But I do feel that the answer at the minute is not by punishing or making life harder for small businesses, because I think that knock-on effect is many people closing, people beginning to think this isn't worth it, isn't worth the debt, and it isn't worth the pain that they're going to go through, which in turn has a knock-on effect on that workforce.
Yeah, and in some ways, I guess the fact that you're coming from this as a position of someone who is generally supportive of them, and perhaps means that it's a critique that they might listen to a bit more anyway. I know that you're here to talk about business, but there is another very big story, of course, on hospitality on TV and food in the papers and on broadcast at the minute, which is Greg Wallace. I know it's very tricky talking about someone in the same industry. I'm guessing someone that you probably know as well. But I did just wonder if there was any comment that you wanted to make on it. You know, do you have any sympathy with him, or do you think that actually, you know, what he did wasn't acceptable? I don't know if there's anything that you'd like to say.
Listen, I mean, I don't know anything about the allegations, and I don't know. I mean, I have no understanding of the story apart from there's allegations made, and Greg has come out. I know he said some things yesterday, and I know he's come out today as well and apologised for the things that he said yesterday. I've known Greg for a long time. I've always known him as a high energy person that has always got something to say, that that is fun and ongoing. And I've enjoyed spending time when we filmed together with Greg. But in terms of the allegations, I've got no real understanding of what's going on, so I can't really add a comment to it, apart from, yes, I know Greg, and yes, I've always known him to have lots of he's always full of jokes, and he's always full of charisma, and that front of camera charisma is always something that continues into off screen as well.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I do understand that, it's not, if you don't know the details of the allegations, or you never witnessed something yourself, it's hard to sort of make a comment on that. Do you think there's a bit of an issue in TV sometimes where if you're kind of famous enough or popular enough, if you like, then these things get a bit swept under the carpet?
Oh, I'm not really sure, Sophie. I think I work my own particular way. I try to operate in front of the television and behind the scenes when I do anything in media, the same way that I run in my business, that, all the members of team are, incredibly important, and trying to be around them. You try to do everything you can to make sure that people enjoy themselves at work. One of the biggest things that I'm most proud of is, the team of people that have been around us at the Hand of Flowers, and the continuing businesses that have been with us for, up to 20 years, that we've grown with these people. So, I consider ourselves as a nice place to work, and I try and follow that into the world of television as well.
Yeah, it's good advice, I think, for anyone, whatever industry you work in. And there's another question that I did have to slip in before you go, if possible, and that's on Christmas dinner. I know it's, we're just into December now. It's something a lot of our viewers are going to be stressed about. I'm hosting this year, and I'm very worried about it. So do you have any tips for how to make the process a bit easier?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and I would say it depends how many you're cooking for, but the biggest thing is don't worry about it too much. Like, cook everything with love. It will still taste amazing if you love it. If you hate everything will taste uptight and you won't have enjoyed it. Enjoy the process. Planning is always good. Cook it, like you can cook the roast potatoes before you even roast any of the meats, right? So you can take up all the other space getting the roast potatoes cooked, take them out, leave them to cool. It's no problem, because they'll only take 10 minutes to reheat. So don't worry about it. Get the roast potatoes done, then roast your turkey or your beef or whatever it is you're going to do. Then whilst that's resting, you can reheat the other stuff back through the oven. So just a little bit of structure and a little bit of planning, and don't worry about it too much. I mean, I grew up with my mum and with families on an estate where, you'd end up with garden furniture as your Christmas table. So listen, like, if you're quite happy sitting on plastic seats and having a slightly overcooked turkey roll, then don't worry. If it's done with love, it doesn't matter. You just enjoy the company.
I love it. And I'll tell you what, the last time I interviewed you, I remember you gave me the tip about the cooling roast potatoes, which I've done ever since. And no joke, it's transformed my Sunday roast. It genuinely. Thank you very much indeed, Tom Kerridge. Great to have you on the show.
Pleasure, Sophie. Take care.
Has made me feel a bit better about Christmas dinner, it's true. Right, let's bring in our duo for the evening, shall we? The former Shadow Culture Secretary, Thangam Debbonaire, and the former Conservative Cabinet Minister, Andrew Mitchell. Great to have you both on the panel this evening. And we'll talk about Greg Wallace a bit later on the programme, but I just wanted to talk about our kind of lead story about Labour and business. Thangam, I'm interested to get your perspective on this, because, look, Tom Kerridge there, he backed Labour, right? He wrote that letter before the election, calling on people to give Labour a chance, saying that he believed in the economic message. And he's obviously worried about the impact that some of these changes are going to have on all business, but particularly the hospitality sector. Do you think Labour should be looking again at that national insurance change?
What I noticed Tom say is that he didn't have easy answers and that he appreciated that there was a balance to be struck. And he also said that it does benefit the hospitality industry if their employees are able to get healthcare promptly, which he also said is something that Labour's doing something about. I think it's tricky.
He said because it would be catastrophic on the hospitality industry as well,
and
though,
nobody wants that. And I think it's been a very, very hard time for the hospitality industry. And boosting the cost of living, dealing with the cost of living crisis and boosting the amount of money in people's pockets does have a good impact on the hospitality industry, as I think Tom may have partially acknowledged there by saying when people are hard up, it's the easy thing to cancel. Well, I want to see working people get better pay in their pockets. I want to see working people able to afford their bills. We've had a terrible few years since the disastrous Liz Truss budget, which shot mortgage rates up really, really high, so that put up the housing cost of living. When we had inflation rates at around 10%, now they've come down since then, but that doesn't mean that prices are going down. Prices are still high compared to where they've been, and that's difficult for everybody. So I think the things that this Labour government are doing to tackle the cost of living crisis, to bring down NHS waiting times, to invest for the long term in our energy system, those are things which will bear fruit in the end. But in the meantime, I can see, and I really feel for people running the hospitality businesses. So I absolutely get why he's saying this, but I notice that what he's doing is being quite cautious about saying there are other things and it's a difficult balance.
Andrew, what's your take on there?
Well, I think any government should listen carefully to what people like Tom are saying. They're very experienced. They know about an industry which employs enormous numbers of people. And the problem really is this, that Labour said its defining aim was to increase growth, to make sure that growth improved in Britain. And that is absolutely right. That's the holy grail that we all want to see achieved. And in a way, what they have done has not only apparently broken the word they gave during the election. I went round my constituents in the election campaign saying, you know, be very careful what you wish for with the Labour government, because dogs bark, cats meow, and Labour puts up taxes. And Labour said they wouldn't. Labour said they wouldn't do
and
that.
And the Conservatives as well.
And
to you, right?
Yes, well, we did. But remember, we had to deal with a
high
COVID crisis that cost £400 billion, and that's why we took the measures we did. We did it in order to save families and jobs and to bolster the economy at a very difficult time. So I make no apology for what we did then. It was the right thing to do when Rishi Sunak was the Chancellor. But what you've now got, at a time when you want to have growth and you want to have more jobs and you want to have more economic success, you are destroying the ability of employers like Tom to employ more people because of the costs of employment. Imposing a tax on jobs is not the way to get growth. And I think Labour will suffer very badly from that.
I think it is quite something to blame absolutely everything on the COVID crisis. NHS waiting lists were going up before COVID. They were already bad. People were waiting years. Now, that has an impact on employers. You cannot, after 5 months, blame absolutely everything on the Labour government. It was under the Tories that we had the catastrophic effect on the NHS. Under Tories, social care was being run down. Under Tories, education funding was being run down. Any number of things which, over the course of a 14-year series of Conservative governments, add on to which the Liz Truss disastrous budget, you then have a situation where a Labour government comes in, dealt an atrocious hand of cards, and actually is willing to roll up their sleeves and get on with it. And look, I see Keir as someone who is serious for serious times, and they are serious times.
Well, I don't agree with very much of that at all. But just to take one aspect of what Thangam has said. If you are concerned and worried about interest rates, and you're quite right, the Liz Truss budget was a disaster, and it did lead to a very temporary increase in interest rates. But we know now, because of the tax and budgetary decisions the Labour government has taken, the Chancellor of the Exchequer has taken, we know from no less a source than the Governor of the Bank of England that interest rates will remain higher than they would have done otherwise, and for longer. So, you know, on that key point, I'm afraid Labour has shot themselves in the foot.
OK, I feel like you could both keep going at this for a while. But I'm going to come in because we are out of time on that discussion. And thanks both very much indeed. We'll have lots more from Thangam and Andrew throughout the programme. But now let's talk about Greg Wallace, TV star, MasterChef host, who's been heavily criticised after saying women of a certain age were the only ones to be offended by allegations of his inappropriate behaviour. Well, we're now on day 3 of the saga, and Downing Street has condemned his comments as misogynistic. There are also calls for MasterChef to be taken off air. The production company behind the show says it's investigating the allegations, and of course there are now questions for the BBC, again over the conduct of one of its most famous stars. He's now apologised for causing offence.
I want to apologise for any offence that I caused with my post yesterday and any upset I may have caused to a lot of people. I wasn't in a good headspace when I posted it. I've been under a huge amount of stress, a lot of emotion. I felt very alone, under siege yesterday when I posted it. It's obvious to me I need to take some time out now while this investigation is underway. I hope you understand, and I do hope that you will accept this apology.
Well, our correspondent, Molly Mullane, is outside the BBC offices in West London for us. Molly, what's the update you've got for us?
Well, it certainly feels like it was somewhat inevitable that we'd hear some form of apology from Greg Wallace. Days of mounting pressure, and particularly that backlash building over the last 24 hours or so about how he responded to the allegations against him, initially dismissing them as allegations made only by middle-class women of a certain age. Now, clearly, we've seen that actually that acted only to fuel the anger and aggravating his accusers. It was also those comments that brought Downing Street into the conversation today. They said that those comments by Greg Wallace were misogynistic and inappropriate. We also heard from a government spokesperson today confirming that the Culture Secretary had in fact sought assurances from the BBC that there was a robust complaints procedure in place. Now, worth just reminding people that these allegations really started properly coming to light on Thursday, when we heard that 13 people had made allegations against Greg Wallace, among them Kirsty Walk, former BBC Newsnight presenter, also a contestant on Celebrity MasterChef back in 2017. And the allegations against him concern his conduct, his behaviour on a number of different BBC programmes across 17 years, alleging these people that he made inappropriate, sexualised comments that made women feel deeply uncomfortable in the workplace. Now, we at Sky News have spoken to another former contestant on MasterChef who was a contestant back in 2011. Her name's Jackie Kearney, and she says that this behaviour became normalised and that production staff really would have heard the types of comments that Greg Wallace was making. Here's some of what she had to say to one of my colleagues earlier.
I think Greg created an environment where making comments about how women look, how women behave, how they carry themselves and what they're wearing would be normalised in a way that you would expect to see in a 90s lads mag. But it was just normalised in this professional environment, and you were expected to just continue in what you were doing in the same way without it. You were meant to have Teflon skin that was supposed to be just not go inside. And he made that a normal culture.
Now, we asked Banijay UK, the production company behind MasterChef, for a response, and they responded in a statement to say Banijay UK takes this matter incredibly seriously, but while the external investigation is ongoing, we won't be commenting on individual allegations. They went on to say it's important to note that MasterChef welfare processes are regularly adapted and strengthened, and there are clear protocols to support both crew and contributors. These include multiple ways of reporting issues, including anonymously. HR contact details are promoted, and contributors are assigned a point of contact on set available to discuss any issues or concerns. So an attempt there to assure people that there are indeed robust processes in place, but clearly questions will continue for the BBC as an institution. For their part, they say that back in 2017 and 2018, they did in fact warn Mr. Wallace about his behaviour. They did take action. They answered some questions today about the immediacy of the programme. Many programmes pre-recorded, one of them set to air in the next couple of hours or so, another couple throughout the course of the week. They said they will go ahead, and actually these programmes are about far more than just an individual and mean so much to so many chefs right up and down the country. But these questions, I'm sure, will continue to mount for Greg Wallace and for the BBC.
Molly, thank you very much indeed. Molly Mullane reporting there for us in West London. Right, let's chat to Thangam and Andrew again, shall we? Andrew, I'm interested to know your take on this. You know, how seriously should we take the allegations?
Well, no one should behave inappropriately in the way that is alleged, and there seem to be quite a lot of people alleging something of that sort. The right way to approach this is, of course, to have an independent inquiry, and I'm glad the production company have made clear that's what they will do. I think he's made it a lot worse for himself by not immediately apologising and by trying to call the odds on it. I think he's done himself more damage than he needed to. But the right thing now is for him to go off the air and for the production company, unmolested by the press and everyone else, to look into it and let us know what the truth is behind these allegations.
Yeah, it's almost like the video from yesterday would be kind of used in PR courses for how not to respond to a crisis, and seems to have kind of offended, you know, anyone who's middle-aged, anyone who's a woman, anyone who's middle class. It's possibly not the most straightforward things to do. Thangam, you, of course, were a former shadow culture secretary. I'm interested to know your take on this. How involved do you think we should be in, the way that people like Greg Wallace or other big stars act?
I think the fact that Greg Wallace thought it would be OK to say those things yesterday is indicative of wider attitudes that are not just perhaps Greg's, though they clearly seem to be. It was his own words, nobody made them say them. But it's not new, and sadly, it's not going away. Now, yes, there are high-profile women in many more professions now than there used to be when I was a young musician, actually back in the 1980s. But high-profile cases of sexual abuse and sexual assault in the 1980s, 1990s continue now, whether it's in the music industry, as Shadow Culture Secretary I was looking at that, but also in acting, in other parts of the entertainment industry and in other high-profile professions. But I think if we learn anything from a recent rape trial in France, the trial of the rapists of Gisèle Pellicot, we should remember that people who are sexually assaultive, people who are sexist, people who are misogynist, can come from all walks of life. And justifying sexist behaviour, because that's what Greg Wallace was doing yesterday, by turning it on us, and I include myself in that. I am a middle-class woman of a certain age. I am 58. Am I offended? No, I'm absolutely damn well used to this sort of behaviour. Am I angry? Yes, because it's creating this sort of environment which allows misogyny to continue for decades and decades. Those of us with daughters, with goddaughters, with nieces, we do not want the next generation and the next generation after that to have to grow up thinking that this is normal, because it should not be. And for most men, it's not what they do. But for those who don't, they need to be part of the challenge. They need to. Feminist allies, women's allies need to step up and be vocal in their opposition to such sexist and misogynistic behaviour, and I'm glad Number 10 has.
The other sort of point that I kind of want to make when talking about the story as well is that, you hear Greg Wallace kind of dismissing middle-class celebrities, women of a certain age, but these are women in positions of relative power, and it's a lot easier to speak out.
Exactly.
If I look at my own sort of career, the sexism that I've experienced was all when I was much, much younger. I'm fine now, but, it's kind of at the beginning, when you're in your 20s, when you haven't got the autonomy, that's when you need allies, whether it's older women, whether it's older men, whatever it is, because you don't have, I guess, you're just not in the position where it's easy to speak out.
And that's exactly what we've seen here, because let's say Greg Wallace is right. I'm not even sure that he is, but let's say he is. For exactly the reasons that you've outlined, Sophie, it is easier, I wouldn't say easy, but it's easier to be challenging when you have a sense of agency and you already have your own position of strength. And for younger women who we do not know, whether younger women or women who don't feel as strong or as much agency, who haven't felt able to speak out, we just don't know.
Yes, I agree with most of that, and I think that all of it I agree with. And I think I'd make 2 points. Firstly, he made it much worse for himself by appearing not to understand that society has changed and how much society has changed. And the other thing I would say is I arrived in the House of Commons 37 years ago, and I'm sure Thangam would agree with this. I do think that we've made enormous strides in this area of sexism, etc. We've got further to go, as Thangam said, but I do think we should acknowledge that we are generally on the right path, and incidents like this are much more serious and get much higher profile because they are unacceptable in a way they would never have been called out before.
I appreciate progress, I really do, and Andrew, you're absolutely right. I mean, I felt it even in the time I was there. However, I think women are getting pretty fed up of having to feel grateful that things aren't quite as bad as they were when we were younger. It's time this was over. I mean, I do not understand why any man would think this is an appealing quality for them as a man in their profession or in their relationships with women. I really seriously question it, and progress is good, but I am so impatient now. I am so done having to be grateful for things being better than they were 40 years ago when I was a teenager.
OK, thanks both. Really interesting chat. Thank you. Well, of course, the latest twists and turns in the Greg Wallace story is sure to feature in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the chief political correspondent of The Sun, Jack Elson, and the journalist and broadcaster, Jenny Kleeman. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up. Will the government follow Australia with a ban on social media for under-16s? Sky News speaks to families and MPs here calling for tougher measures. Plus, as civil war in Syria escalates. MPs debate how to respond. Stay with us.
We've come to one of Moscow's Cold War bunkers. It was built as a top-secret command centre.
Being here really feels like you're stepping back in time. I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
A show of military might and menace.
Courage, bravery and sacrifice will win the day.
It's a new subject. They'll learn about combat drones and some how to handle a Kalashnikov.
The Kremlin continues to put forward its own version of events, both present and past.
There's no mention of the fact that Russia invaded its neighbour. That's rewriting history, isn't it?
Now we have to read it carefully.
Vladimir Putin put forward his plan for a ceasefire in Ukraine, telling Kiev, pull out of your eastern territories and the war will end. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Vladimir Putin is already the Kremlin's longest-serving leader since Stalin. The question is, what will a fifth Putin term mean for Russia and the world?
Why do you support Vladimir Putin, Mr. Segal?
I can't answer questions that stupid.
I've watched Vladimir Putin attempt to create a new world order.
The St. Petersburg Economic Forum was the backdrop to Vladimir Putin's latest verbal volley that Russia could send missiles to other nations to target the West.
Ambassador, I wonder, shall we have a quick word for Sky News?
Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine?
Swedish media, oh my God, you're not afraid of being here.
American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display.
Russia says Evan Gershkovich was caught red-handed, but has never produced any evidence to back that up. Sky News. Get the full story first.
This conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Hello, welcome back. Well, the civil war in Syria has reignited in the last 48 hours. Syrian and Russian jets have launched fresh airstrikes against rebel-held positions in Aleppo, the country's second largest city. Now, pro-Iranian militias have crossed the border from Iraq to reinforce the Syrian army, and President Bashar al-Assad has vowed to crush the rebels. Now, just to bring you up to speed with the latest, the conflict dates back 13 years when opposition protests against President Assad's rule began. The regime's brutal response spilled into years of civil war. Rebels, including Islamist factions, first took over eastern Aleppo in 2012. But in 2016, backed by Russian airstrikes, government forces pushed them out of the city. But now they're back, led by a Sunni Islamist group called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, based in Idlib province, which they claim to have completely overrun. From there, they moved in on Aleppo, taking the city in just 3 days and seizing the international airport. They're pictured here, posing in front of a citadel in the centre of the city. Well, the government retaliated with airstrikes, including on Aleppo University Hospital. The insurgents have now entered Hama province, capturing towns on the way to Hama city. In the last hour, MPs have been debating the latest developments in the Commons. Here's what the Middle East Minister had to say.
Events are moving quickly and the trajectory is unclear. My primary concern in the immediate term is the impact on civilians and, of course, delivery of humanitarian assistance. This is particularly worrying, Madam Deputy Speaker, if we see more large-scale attacks by the regime or Russia against civilians. I call directly this evening on all actors involved, including Iran and Russia, to act in accordance with international humanitarian law and not to target civilians or civilian infrastructure, including health facilities. Humanitarian actors should be granted full humanitarian access on the ground.
Let's talk now to Thangam and Andrew, shall we? Andrew, it's one of those days where it's great to have someone like you with your expertise on foreign affairs on the programme. What's your assessment of what we're seeing now in Syria?
Well, we are seeing these two thoroughly disreputable, unpleasant parties attacking each other, and who is going to suffer? It will, of course, be the ordinary people who are caught up in the middle of this. I mean, I noticed that Aleppo is now being attacked once again by Syrian and Russian jets. In the past, Syrian and Russian jets have bombed hospitals. So they've seen from the air that these are hospitals because they've got the Red Cross on top of them, and yet they've continued to attack and bomb them, which is a war crime. And that's what's happening. There will be a continuation of this fighting between the terrorists and between Bashar al-Assad. Incidentally, I'm amazed that the ICC has not launched an investigation and a warrant against Bashar al-Assad, given their recent acts, because he has butchered and murdered so many of his own citizens. And this is a country where half the people have been displaced. It was 22 million people. Something like 5 million internally have been displaced. 6 million are in camps, heavily supported by Britain, actually, around the country and the 4 countries there, and 1 million have made the dangerous journey in a leaky boat across the Mediterranean, mainly into Turkey and Greece. So it's the most appalling conflict. It's been going on for years. It's now been reignited. And, of course, the government is quite right. The new Foreign Office Minister, Hamish Faulkner, said it very well in the House of Commons. The government is quite right to say that everyone should be governed by respect for human rights. In any actions they take, they should reckon that they may one day be held to account. And holding people to account is extremely difficult, but we did it in Bosnia. Everyone said, you'll never get all these perpetrators of human rights abuses. You'll never get them. But in the end, we got literally all of them. So anyone who's taking part in this conflict in Syria should remember that the long arm of international law may one day reach them, and let that govern how they behave.
You're right, aren't you, when you talk about Aleppo? It's such a familiar word to us because, over the years we have seen so much bloodshed, so much fighting.
It was one of the great cities in the world before all this started, and the way in which human rights have been abused there, the city levelled. It took the Russians and the Syrians a long time to take it back. The terrorists have taken it back even really very quickly indeed on this occasion. But what about the poor people who live in the area around there who've suffered so grievously?
I mean, is there much that the UK government can do?
Well, I think it emphasises how important it is that the UK government, Hamish Faulkner, who we saw there, but also Keir Starmer as Prime Minister, are rightly trying to re-establish us as important players on the world stage. We have a different role to play in the middle 21st century from one we may have played 50 years ago, but it's no less important that we are there to defend democracy, the rule of law and human rights. There are refugees even now who have been in Lebanon, who left, as Andrew said, for a neighbouring country, but have now, because of bombing and attacks on Lebanon and because of the situation there, are crossing back into Syria to face further danger. We have a whole region, Middle East and North Africa, actually, which is in many ways a destabilising force on the entire world. And we have to learn that what happens in what used to be seen as a far-off country of which we know nothing, actually has direct consequences for us, for our region, and for the international rules-based order. Andrew's absolutely right.
One of the very interesting things we did some surveys of all the people, these huge numbers of humanity who are in these camps around Syria. One of the interesting things is that the survey showed they were absolutely consistent, that what they wanted was not to have to emigrate to a new country. What they wanted to do was to go back, when the fighting stopped, to the place from which they'd been driven by violence. And it's worth remembering that. It's worth remembering.
Absolutely right. Thank you both very much indeed. I want to take you to the Irish election now, because counting is down now to the final 3 seats and a clearer picture is emerging tonight. Fianna Fáil is on course to secure the most seats in Parliament, and along with Fine Gael, looks best placed to form a coalition government, but Sinn Féin says it will still be involved in coalition talks. But as it stands, with 171 of the 174 seats declared, Fianna Fáil has 46 seats, with Sinn Féin and Fine Gael both on 38 seats, all achieving around a fifth of the voter share. To have a majority in government, the parties need to achieve a combined 88-seat majority, so a deal of some sort will have to be achieved to form the next administration. Well, let's go now to our Ireland correspondent, Stephen Murphy. Stephen, what do you make of the results so far?
Yeah, well, look, it's nearly 8 o'clock, 8 p.m. on day 3, and they're still counting. So welcome to the Irish electoral system. Nothing happens very quickly, and I can tell you a formation of a new Irish government, that's not going to happen very quickly either. And that's because the proportional representation system we have here in Ireland, it nearly always produces coalition governments. You mentioned there the majority, the bare minimum is 88. I mean, realistically, they need to get that up into the mid-90s to have any sort of a stable government. So at the moment, what we think will happen is a return of the two biggest parties from the last government. That's Fianna Fáil, as you mentioned there, probably the big winners from this election, and Fine Gael. And they will probably need a junior partner to make up the numbers. Last time it was the Green Party, the Irish Greens. They've been pretty much wiped out this time round. So it may be somebody like Labour or a resurgent Social Democrat Party here in Ireland. They had great elections, and there have been some subtle overtures going on in that direction. The main opposition party, Sinn Féin, they haven't given up all hope yet, publicly at least, of being able to cobble together some sort of left-leaning coalition that may actually have the numbers as well. But I don't think realistically anybody is expecting Mary Lou McDonald's party to be able to achieve that. The negotiations should begin in earnest, I suppose, later on this week. Last time around in 2020, it went on for months. Now we're hoping this time that it may be formed at some stage in January. We know that senior politicians here are really keen to have a government in place by the time that Donald Trump is inaugurated, and that happens on the 20th of January in Washington. There have been plenty of warnings here, not just from the political parties, but from some economists as well, about the potential trade shock, transatlantic trade shock they're calling it, that maybe it's a threat posed by the Trump administration to the way Ireland does business, particularly with US multinationals based here. They pay an awful lot of tax here. A huge chunk of the Irish tax take is from those companies. Donald Trump is very keen to repatriate those funds to the United States, and the Irish political establishment really want to have a government and a cabinet formed by the time that he takes office in order to start tackling that issue straight away. But for the moment, it looks very much as though it will be a sort of reshaping of the last coalition, Fianna Fáil taking over from Fine Gael as the largest party, and then probably the bookies' favourite for the next Taoiseach, the next Irish Prime Minister, is more than likely Micheál Martin. But all of that will shake out in the weeks to come.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Stephen Murphy there. Now, last week, Australia became the first country in the world to ban social media for under-16s, and that's, of course, reignited the debates in the UK. Could it happen here? Well, a private member's bill is trying to make it so. Here's our correspondent, Tamara Cohen.
Who are you? Yeah. It's because you're an early morning girl.
With a daughter at secondary school, Mum Susie is trying to keep smartphones and social media at bay for as long as she can. 12-year-old Amelia has a phone, but her parents have disabled the internet.
I have music for the bus. I have messages to speak to my friends and parents, and call and contacts.
So by not having all these apps, what sort of things are you missing out on?
There's a lot of peer pressure. That's like, oh, how come you don't have WhatsApp up yet? And I get a lot of my friends saying, oh, your parents are so boring. Oh, how come your parents won't let you do this? There was once where so I was coming out of netball. We were taking my two friends home. They were both literally just walking in the car park on their phones, and I was the only one walking without it.
A campaign has been growing to ban unrestricted use of social media for children under 16. Now a group of MPs are hoping to pressure the government to change the law sooner rather than later.
My bill is trying to do really one simple thing through a number of measures, and that is to make the version of smartphones that children use under 16 different to those above 16. So a good example of this is like the Instagram teen account, which is good. I would like it to go a lot further, but what I'd like to see is products being developed for under 16-year-olds that are different to those for adults.
Restrictions are backed by parents who have suffered the worst trauma. Stuart's son Ollie was murdered by other teenagers after a dispute which began on social media.
There's no accountability. These platforms are put out there, kids use them, people get hurt. I firmly believe that I lost my son because of weak governance and poor legislation, full stop, which is why we are doing what we are doing. If you could see I can't show you any of the stuff that we saw on his phone, but it's horrific. And a lot of that stuff you can't unsee, and especially as a child.
Some children's charities are against a total ban, saying it punishes teenagers and ignores the benefits of phones when used safely. But in a world increasingly dominated by online content, a growing number of parents want to keep the guardrails on. Tamara Cohen, Sky News.
And Andrew, again, shall we? And what is your take on this?
I totally get why parents are worried. And why it feels like it's got to be a shared endeavour to try and make the online world safer for children. I think I'd like the tech world to catch up with the priorities of parents and the fears and the terrible experiences that so many children and young people have had. I don't want to let online organisations off the hook, though. I think social media companies need to take some responsibility. And what I don't want to do is have a cliff edge so that young people don't have a smartphone and then suddenly they do, with having learnt habits and understood maybe some of the sort of media literacy that I think would be useful. But I totally get why parents are concerned, and I don't, at the moment, see social media companies stepping up to their responsibilities.
Andrew, where's your...
No, I think I agree with that entirely. I think that the role of the parent is incredibly important in all of this, but the role of the social media company also is very important. So my instincts will be to vote for the bill, but we must be careful we don't create an impossible situation where it's completely unenforceable and we have a sort of a situation of the Wild West in schools and amongst children where some are behaving in one way and others in another. So I'm extremely sympathetic. I think we listen to the parents. We expect the media companies to have obligations to us and to families. Let's give the bill a fair wind and let's see if we can make some progress on this.
Yeah, it's a tricky balance, isn't it? I'm really interested to get both of your views on that. Still to come on the Politics Hub.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yay! It worked!
You could really sense his relief there, couldn't you? Something went right, yes, you switched on the Downing Street lights. We're going to be talking Christmas trees after the break.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
I saw police being forced or pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news. The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem. Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Hello, welcome back. Now it's officially December, so here on the Politics Hub, we thought it was well time for us to start getting into the festive spirit. We reckon it is now officially acceptable to put up trees, decorations, bar humbug to any grinchy colleagues complaining that it's still too early. It's December, so we've got the green light, and Westminster agrees. Tonight was the traditional switching on of the Christmas lights by the Prime Minister and the Speaker. If you're still not feeling festive, this could help.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yay! It worked. Nervous moment there, but it's all good.
Yes! Happy Christmas! Happy Christmas and a Merry New Year!
Beautiful. Keir Starmer with the Downing Street Christmas tree, and then you've got the Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, lighting up Parliament's Christmas tree. Very festive, I have to say. I love the nerves. Are they going to come on, please? That would be a box office moment. My tree's up, I should say. I actually put it up the last day of November, which is against the rules, I have to say. I'm slightly worried it's going to be dead by Christmas, but thought we'd get into the mood. And we thought we'd really embrace the festive spirit by showing you the Christmas trees that our panel have up tonight. So this is Thangam's tree. I think it's quite cute, I have to say.
It's cute, it's tiny, and actually it's a cheeky way of... I mean, I've been quite cheeky because it makes it look like it's bigger than it is. It's actually about yay big, less than a foot. And that's because I take it to India with me this Christmas. It folds up into a suitcase, and that's because that's where I'll be at Christmas. And I've never had a real tree. I mean, that's why there's an Indian statue. Never had a real tree, only had a false one.
I love the commitment to Christmas.
Oh, yeah.
You were taking a Christmas tree
to
India.
Would be upset. If I didn't do that, my mum would be very upset.
Let's have a look at Andrew's, shall we? Oh, that was lovely, I have to say. You look so proud of it as well. Where's this tree?
And you can see the leaflets that are there in the corner for delivery in my constituency. This is in the royal town of Sutton, Coldfield, in my office. And it's our constituency office, and the tree is the work of our constituency agent, Jack, and he invited me to put the last bauble on it. And that's the picture of me doing that.
So you're taking credit, but really just put one bauble on?
Well, no, it's the work of the Constituency Association, but he invited me to put the last bauble on. And in fact, like you, we did it slightly early because we did it last Friday night.
Yeah, I'm all there. I'm there for it. I have got a real one at home, though, so I think the droppage is going to be an issue for me, I'm not going to lie. Now, we're going to end by letting you into a bit of a state secret here on Sky News, because this, for the first time ever, shown on TV, this is the tree that is in the gallery at Sky News. And I hope we don't get into any trouble for showing this, but this is in the gallery at Sky. So you can see there the lovely Christmas tree. They've got all of the presenters on as little angels, because we're obviously very angelic, clearly. Very, very angelic, all of us. So it's our own celebration of Christmas. Great to have you on the programme today. That is all from us tonight. I'll see you tomorrow at 7 for more festivities. You've got this all the way through December. Only joking. Up next, it's UK Tonight with Sarah Jane Mee. But I'll see you tomorrow at 7.